much for being here. On behalf of the MRIA Board of Directors and Tricia Bennett, just absolutely thrilled to be hosting Lori here for this talk. It's ask first, listen second. Having said that, I'm going to ask you to please think of questions because she's going to leave us a few seconds at the end so that we can ask questions and of course move on to the next session. So Lori, welcome, and I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. What you guys don't know is they've already started counting down at exactly 3:30, so I've lost a minute just because I was social. So we're gonna go fast. How am I standing up here talking to you guys about qualitative? I have been a quantitative researcher for my entire career. I was doing graduate work in consumer behavior when I joined Advantis, and we are a discrete choice firm, among other things. So I spent a good chunk of my life learning about modeling and learning about product design and pricing work and so on. And I'm going to come and talk to you guys about qualitative research. And it's not as crazy as it sounds, because when you think about discrete choice, when you think about some of those methodologies, one of the things that's true about them is we don't ask people, which feature do you like the best? We get them to reveal that to us through their choices. And so qualitative is a lot like that, in that we don't say, which feature would you like in this new tool? We listen to their stories, we listen to their pain, and from there we infer what they can use in the future. So one of the things that's been very common in a lot of the work we've done in the last little while is that our research clients have been willing to listen when we say, we like the RFP, but we don't think you've asked the right question. Let's go a little deeper. And so this quote is great because, again, if you ask me to build a bridge, I'll go off and build a bridge. But if you tell me you need to get across the river, we're going to figure out whichever way we can do that together. So we've heard this a lot today, so I won't dwell too long on this. The idea that research can be changed if you put the consumers, the clients, the people first. So traditional research often happens in the way that it starts with the business. It starts with, we have this product, we have these new features, we have this new iteration of the product that we want to put out, and we want to find out if there's a market for it, and B, how do we tell people about it? And how can we fine-tune it to make it the best product possible? And so you're making decisions based on kind of a limiting set of assumptions at the beginning, whereas if you put the people first, you end up with design that's ideated from people, from consumers, that's collaborative. So you're hearing about their unmet needs, you're hearing about ways that they have pain points in their life that need to be solved, and so on. And so you're looking from a broader context, you're looking from a broader set of assumptions when you're designing, when you're coming up with the final prototypes, concepts, marketing ideas, whatever it is. And so that's the way that we approach research from a design thinking perspective, which is we look first at the context. What is going on in not just your industry, but across industries? What is going on in terms of general trends? And the best example I have of this is Gail Lloyd used to be a researcher for Batesville Caskets. What does a casket company research? Well, she spends a lot of time looking at everything from fashion trends, automotive trends, shoe trends, health trends. So she really looks at the context, because that tells you everything from where people are going to shop, the designs they're going to like in their caskets, and the health trends tell you things about, what's your market share going to be in the next year and how big should those caskets be. But it was such an odd example, but it really stuck with me in that you have to look across industries and across groups to be able to understand. And as we've talked about, you really have to start with people. What are those people's needs? What are the people's needs? And what's going on in their lives? They are people. They're not participants. They're not respondents. They're not consumers. They're people. They have fulsome lives, and we have to understand all parts of it. And of course, you have to bring it back into the context of the business, because you have to be able to design the products, the marketing that you design in the end has to work within the context of the business, or the business has to be willing to move. So I just have a few case studies, and like I said, the common theme around these case studies is two things. One, they allowed us to redefine the research question, and two, as a quantitative researcher, I wouldn't say dragged kicking and screaming into the wonderful world of qual, because I've really learned to appreciate it, but we utilize qualitative research to really enhance the answers that we were given, and I've grown to love it. So the first case study is for a health insurance firm. And this health insurance company came to us wanting to talk about two audiences, two very important life stages for insurance. Young adults, perhaps getting their first insurance, moving off their parents' plan or their student plan, moving out into the world of work, and then new retirees who are moving away from, in Canada, having employer benefits. And so they're moving on to a completely different life stage. And so my client came to me and said very simply, Advanus, tell us how to test some new benefits and services for these insurance products that cater to these two life stages. And I went, great, okay, let's sit down, let's talk. What do you know about new retirees? What do you know about young adults? What have you already worked through to help you come up with these features and benefits that we're gonna test? Because I'm good at that, I could test some features and benefits. And what we learned really quickly is they didn't really know a lot. They had some predefined assumptions about this life stage, but it was basically the assumptions of the 6 people in the strategy team sitting around talking about it. They didn't have any validation of these assumptions. So we stepped back and we said, well, maybe we should start there. So we asked 3 research questions. We said, well, what concerns and fears and excitement do people have about this life stage? And those concerns, fears, and excitements were not about health insurance. They were anything from financial concerns, health concerns, I'm going to be bored now that I'm retired. Whatever concerns people had, we wanted to ask it in the broadest context possible. Then we wanted to find out how they define good health. What does good health mean? Because how you define good health, that's what you're going to want to protect in health insurance. And then how did health fit into their planning for this life stage? So some of these new retirees, we had some people who were going to retire in the next couple years, and we had some who had already retired. So they've already kind of gone through this planning process, and they can let us know what they did so that we could maybe help the next generation do it a little better. So we didn't do quantitative research at all. We actually did a combination. We did in-person focus groups in the 2 major cities that were covered by this company, and we did online bulletin boards as well. So the focus groups were for both the new retirees in some groups and the young adults in some groups, and we augmented with online bulletin boards for our younger audience as well. And what's really interesting is we spent most of the time not even talking about health, not even talking about insurance. We went through the journey. We said, well, what have you done? What planning have you done around retirement? What planning have you done, or what's going on in your life as you're moving from student to your first job, your first career, and so on? We spent about an hour in each focus group on that and really hearing about all the things that were happening in their life around health, but without even mentioning it. Then we asked them to define good health, and we got some really interesting context here because we were thinking about the new retirees. The preconceived notions were, number one, that the new retirees were worried about getting sick. That was not true. You know what they were worried about? Anybody have a guess what new retirees worried about most about getting sick? It wasn't themselves, it was their parents. Exactly. They're 55 and 60. They're actually relatively healthy. They might have some things, but they're relatively healthy. It's their 75, 80-year-old parents who are going through all of the challenges right now. So that completely rechanged, because I got to tell you, the features and benefits we were going to test would have helped the 80-year-olds, not the 50-year-olds. And with our young people, they defined health as reduction in stress. Mental health is probably the most important thing that young people talk about. So again, very different. So you think about a health insurer who does things like, chiropractic, prescription, dental. Oh, okay, so how do we deal with this mental health? How do we handle that? So it brought up some really new thinking that we had to do as a company around that. And then the last thing we asked them to do is build an ideal health company, and they really built a partnership. They wanted a company. It wasn't about the benefits. It was about, can you help me navigate the health system? Because it's a hard system to navigate. And again, they're thinking of their parents in some cases. Can you help me when I'm feeling stressed? I don't have a particular illness that I can put a label on and that you can give me a drug or send me to an appointment for, but I'm feeling anxious. Can you offer services that are going to help me with that? So it was very, very different. And that just came from, again, a willingness on our client's part to ask a question differently. So that's the first case study. The second one, and this is kind of a funny story, is proof that you can research anything. I'm vegetarian. My husband owns a vegan cafe, and I did this project for the meat inspection branch of OMAFRA, which is Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food. It's fine. I interviewed abattoirs and slaughterhouse managers for 2 weeks, but it was awesome. So they came to us, OMAFRA came to us through a government RFP, but ultimately came to us and said, we know our communication isn't very good. So can you measure which communication tools are best? Is it our website? Is it our email? And so on. And we said, well, as we're listening to you again, you've got some bigger issues than just, is your website good? And so we redefined it and talked about what is the gap? What do the people need in terms of communication? What information do they need? What's a barrier to them getting that information, and how would they like to see it improve? So we really turned it on its head and talked to the consumers. And so how this relates to qualitative and quantitative is we actually save the qualitative for the end. The original plan, the RFP that was proposed, was to do some qualitative to help write the survey and then go out with quantitative. We said, no, let's save the qualitative. So what we did was we started at the bottom here with a survey of both the staff members of OMAFRA who were in this meat inspection branch, as well as the organizations that they inspect. And you can imagine that being inspected, this is your livelihood. If a bad inspection comes along, or if you're not in compliance, they're shutting you down, or they're causing you a lot of expense. So they're very concerned about knowing the regulations, and you can imagine the regulation booklet's about this thick. So you can imagine that they have to understand it, but it's not exactly written, and it's written legislatively, so it's not written in a way that's understandable. So there was quite a few challenges in terms of effectively communicating to this, and everything from the fact that one really simple finding is if they're sending out notices, they didn't send the notice from an email address like licensing at OMAFRA. They would send it out from Jane Smith at OMAFRA. Well, if Jane Smith was in a new position 6 months later, now it's coming out from Bob Jenkins. Nobody knew what the emails were about. So even just something as simple as let's formalize your email process was actually a big finding in this project, because there was just some real basic things that they had to work on. So we very quickly, so the survey was out, the survey was done again in the ways that mattered to people. So we did both telephone and online, and in a couple cases letter, because we have some, and there's some folks from KW in the room, we have some Mennonite abattoirs who don't answer the telephone. So in some cases we actually sent off letters. But as soon as the surveys were collected, we moved very quickly to an interim report. Within a week we were putting findings in front of the group, and we were brainstorming in a workshop. So this is the first, a little bit of aspect of qualitative, is we didn't provide a report with nice formal slides. We actually said, well, these are the key themes we're seeing. What does this mean to you? And our stakeholders in the room, we collaborated. We spent an entire day together. Myself and my colleague Nicolas from our Montreal office here spent an entire day together with them, collaborating on the next ideas. Based on that, based on understanding what they were most concerned about from the findings, we went out and did a series of IDIs. And the IDIs were targeted based on their survey answers. So we knew which areas they wanted to know more information about. We knew which areas they were most concerned about and wanted to understand in more depth. And we knew the people who also felt that those gaps most acutely. So we went to them and we asked them to redesign the communication with us. So we ended with qualitative, which is a little bit different. Sometimes. So going back to health, because I seem to like health. Going back to health, one of our clients is the Alberta College of Pharmacists. The Alberta College of Pharmacists has a unique challenge in that they are the regulatory body for pharmacists, but they don't have, they're not the direct employers of any of the pharmacists, so they can change to a limited degree. They have to work very closely with things like Shoppers Drug Mart, Rexall Pharma Plus, but also Alberta Health Services, the large hospitals, and so on. And so again, they have a process whereby they interview stakeholders, the stakeholders being the public once every 3 years, stakeholders being those large employers every 3 years, and the pharmacists themselves every 3 years. So this is about the pharmacists themselves. So the quantitative survey was fairly typical. It's what you'd expect. We surveyed all the pharmacists in the province, all 4,300 of them, but what we did was we looked at the survey that they'd used in the past, and we said, are there some things here that we can take off? And we focused really in on the key kind of quantitative metrics that they could benchmark year after year, and we focused that on the quantitative. But what we planned to do all along was, again, qualitative after the fact. So the qualitative in this case was completely disjointed from the quantitative, because there were a few issues that they wanted to put on the survey that we said, this just isn't going to work on a survey. Let's do it in a different way. And so we actually went into qualitative, and my friend Ann Jaycox, who moderated this, loved it because we gave her 3 questions. There wasn't a 10-page moderation guide or a 5-page moderation guide. We literally gave her 3 questions. Number 1 was we had a question related to some issues that were in the survey, some areas that they felt, the pharmacists felt ACP was not living up to their mandate. But then 2 and 3 were, 1, what does patient-centered care mean to you, pharmacists? Because there's a model of patient-centered care coming through. It's coming through in Ontario, it's coming through in Alberta, and it's literally changing the way pharmacists work. You may have seen it if you're interacting with pharmacists in terms of them now doing more consultation and so on, but it really does change the way they've worked for 25 years. It's big and it's scary for them. So we said, okay, let's let them redesign patient-centered care so that as legislation is being developed over the next few years, we have their needs in mind. And how do you overcome the barriers? Because again, as it's starting to happen, what's happening is things like, as pharmacy technicians are being given more authority, the pharmacists are saying, heck no, you can't do that, so there's a barrier being created. As pharmacists are being allowed to be more consultative, you have the doctor saying, hey, you're encroaching on my territory. So there's some very real barriers that were happening. So we literally went forward with just 3 questions and gave them the time and the space to answer those questions in a very fulsome way. And that was, so that was another way that we've used qualitative in conjunction with quantitative, in this case by purposely disjointing them. So the last thing I'll end with is just a few tips for the qualitative researchers in the room to use more qualitative. One is, you've probably always had a very broad question that you've wanted to ask, and you can't ask broad questions unless you allow more qualitative. And we had a great conversation at lunch about, it's even just a matter of ask a few more open-endeds on your survey and use those in a more fulsome way. Try to involve your participants as co-creators, whether this is quantitative or qualitative. Acknowledge that these are the people who are going to use the products and services, so give them permission to give you ideas. Don't just ask them how much they like the idea you've already come up with. Listen to both the mainstream, but sometimes you have to push the envelope and listen to trendsetters. You have to go and find that 10% of people who are already moving in the direction that you think the market might go, and listen to them. But then remember the mainstream, because you have to bring everyone else along at some point as well. Definitely use skilled moderation. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you guys that I have the ability to moderate a focus group. We utilize our friends who are those experts. And really involve your stakeholders. So again, one of the things is facilitating your client group, bringing more people in the room. I was in here a little bit earlier today and they said the same thing, bringing more and more people into the room, not only just to get buy-in, but to get their input, to get their expertise, not just from your very narrow client group, but bring in the finance people, the product marketing people, the agency, everyone that you need that might help out with that. And those are my tips. Questions?
That was fantastic. I think really interesting to see that stakeholder engagement as well in the co-creation piece. We haven't heard that in this room yet today. We can talk more about that later. What questions do we have?
A lot of times I can imagine on the full service side of being research now, that they just give you the RFP and they just say this is what we want. How are you able to get a seat at the table to really get the trust and the proof of concept that you can help design it from a further back perspective as opposed to just the RFP?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to recap, the question is, if you as a researcher receive an RFP and it's written out very black and white, how do you convince that client to maybe take another look? One is, Jeremy said this morning, just be tenacious about it. So that's the first tip, is if you see something and you think it could be done better, call them back and ask. See if they're willing to, how far they're willing to go. Sometimes they're only willing to go a few steps back, and you start there. And sometimes you can't get a full co-creation type of project happening, but you can certainly think about how to ask your questions in a more collaborative way. But honestly, I think it's just ask. Ask and build that relationship and that trust. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah. Mary.
You talked earlier, I think one of the first examples, just talking about new retirees, and in terms of your approaches, you conducted both focus groups and
Sure, absolutely. Two reasons we did that. One is related to the geography. The client was in an area, our provinces in Canada have urban centers and a whole whack of rural. So because of the geography of the client, we did focus groups in the two major cities, but we were really concerned about missing out on the voice of the people who didn't live in those two major cities. So we did bulletin boards as an economical way of reaching those. So I should have mentioned the bulletin boards excluded people who lived in those two cities, so we had both the voices. It wouldn't have made sense to do, say, a rural group, just because it's so diverse. I think we saw some very key themes. I think there were differences in terms of access. We saw some things around that if you live in the major center, you can access a psychologist, you can access, you're at a major, these young adults maybe were at the major universities, whereas in the rural areas, maybe they went straight from high school to work and they're in a center that only has a few thousand people, so it's a different environment. But overall, the themes were very much the same. They cared about the same things.
It'd be very interesting. I haven't seen a study that looks at the online qual versus in-person qual, to actually do a proper comparison. But
Yeah.
we did one recently where the intimacy created with the people online was actually far greater than in person.
I think people are willing to say some things online. There's that social desirability issue where in a focus group, and skilled moderators are going to make sure that doesn't happen, where you have that big talker in the room, or you have people who want to kind of agree with each other in the room, whereas online there's a willingness to say whatever you think. So there's great reasons to use both tools. Yeah.
The idea of infringing on different territories of consultation you described between the pharmacy assistant, the pharmacy person, the pharmacist, the doctor. I'm sure this was fascinating. Were you able to affect any change? How did you work with those insights later? Was it just simply a way to the insurance company plan, or did you ever actually get in there into meet?
Yeah, so the question is just related to the example in the pharmacy college of people who are infringing on each other's workflow. And in terms of the change that we were able to invite, what we did was we actually brought the board of directors, which included all of those major stakeholders. And when we presented the results, we presented it as a workshop. Like, what should we do about that? So the biggest thing that came out of it immediately was a communication strategy. So taking it back to essentially the pharmacist union, the pharmacy technologists union, because they have their own organizations, taking it back to Alberta Health Services, which is the biggest employer of pharmacists, because there were things, again, the college doesn't have a mandate to tell employers to let pharmacy technicians do more things. All they can do is let them know that this is what's happening in the marketplace. And and we're going to have to wrap it up here. We're getting the signal.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.